Okay, so what I was trying to say was that I was lucky enough to be one of Dr. Payne's students when I was at Bucknell. And he's done a ton for handbells and the handbell world. And uh, I think we all know, we've all played his music, we've all heard his name, and he's a big part of the reason that I'm here today. And so I'm going to go try to address some internet issues and say welcome all of you, and welcome to Dr. Payne with his talk on stagecraft and showmanship.
Thank you, Lauren. It's good to see you. Good to see everybody. I decided, in the interest of time, that I would base this discussion on from the ringer standpoint. We could certainly do from the conductor standpoint as well, and maybe that's an issue for another time. But I thought I would just address some things that we want to be sure to think about as professional ensembles, semi-professional ensembles that are going out and entertaining audiences. Of course, the music that we play is the most important thing. It's not us, it's not the conductors, it's not the ringers, it's the music that we bring to our audiences. We want them to be engaged. And that's a big part of stage presence, because if we're well prepared with really great compositions and a good variety of music to give to our audience, then it is necessary to not call attention to ourselves in any way. And so stage presence has a lot to do with that. From the very minute that we walk on stage to the time that we leave and the audience is on their way, hopefully having witnessed a really wonderful performance. I encouraged my own ringers when I was at Bucknell to walk on to the stage with confidence and authority, a very proud walk, basically for all that you have accomplished as an ensemble. And I know some groups, the Raleigh Ringers for one, come in a little more stately, and that's great too, because there's music in the background. A lot of choirs don't have that opportunity. So to have background, kind of a background musical introduction. But I think just coming in with authority is so important. And standing at the table, one step back and looking at the audience. I think any time that the ringers can engage with the audience is really important, because for most of the performance, we are looking at our scores, we're looking at our music, and we don't have a lot of time to look up. So any of those pauses between pieces at the beginning of the concert, I think it's really important to look at the audience, smile if you feel like it, and with your hands behind your back so that you're not tempted to be fiddling with your music or your bells. And I think that in itself, just looking at the audience, attracts a kind of a feeling of friendliness right away. So that, I don't know how many of you have been to concerts where you feel like there's a wall between you and the performers, and there's never any time that you feel like you're totally engaged with that group. And that always makes me feel a little uncomfortable, and I lose interest after a while. So don't come out, fiddle with your music, don't talk amongst yourselves, just enjoy the presence of being in a performance. As the conductor walks out to the center of the stage, then it's, of course, the conductor's prerogative to decide when the first piece starts. I like to begin right away as soon as I get out on stage. I don't want to wait. I don't talk before the first piece. just go at it. And at that time, then the ringers, with a cue from the conductor, put their hands on their bells and bring their bells up to their shoulder. Not on the shoulder, but to the shoulder level. And there are some conductors who like to just have the ringers bring the bells up and start to ring, and that's fine. Whatever works for your ensemble is wonderful. And I think that even if you don't ring for 3 pages or more, that it's best if we all bring the bells up at the same time. Otherwise, that really draws attention to that one person who didn't bring their bells up, or those 2 people. Sometimes that's not possible just because of the logistics, but I would say most of the time it's best to just everybody bring their bells up, because we don't want to call attention to ourselves in any way. Here again, the music is the most important thing. We've all seen ringers counting with their lips, and that's very, very distracting. And we, as conductors, I think we need to encourage them not to do that as much as possible. And if we see, and probably the best way to teach stage presence is to have a video going at a rehearsal, and maybe even a performance where everybody can view it and look at it. Scratching, even doing this can draw attention to yourself. Pushing your glasses back, brushing your hair, all of those gestures are not a part of the music. So that immediately draws everybody in the audience, their eyes at you. And also, I think looking at the audience while you're ringing is not a good idea. Even if you're in a situation where you do have 3 or 4 measures, 3 or 4 pages where you're not ringing, I think engage with the conductor. Look at the conductor. And of course, this is a big, and we can discuss this later, but ringing is a real visual thing, as singing is, because the performers are facing the audience. Most instrumental groups are not facing an audience, and they're looking at music on their stands. And so there's not that visual engagement. There's other forms of engagement with orchestras and bands and wind ensembles. But I think it's a little different for ringers. And I think it's important that we don't look at the audience when we're ringing, because it almost looks like you're looking for approval or whatever. It's better, I think, just to really relate to the conductor and watch the conductor. The facial expression is important for whatever piece is being played, and that's where it comes into play, the difference between choirs and handbell ringing and orchestras, where you need to have some kind of facial expression because you're facing the audience right there, and you're not bringing an instrument to your mouth or to your like a violin. You're ringing with your hands, and and whatever the piece is, whether it's happy or sad or melancholy or emotional, the face can reflect that. And it doesn't mean that you have a plastered on smile through the whole concert. We've seen that too, and that's, I don't prefer that kind of performance, because it begins to look fake. Honesty and sincerity, I always talk to my ringers about the fact that if we are honest and sincere in our performance, we will engage like nothing else. And that's probably the best advice I can give. And I know that there are times when it can be difficult to focus. you never know who's having family problems, or when there's some stressful thing happened right before a performance. And somehow we have to be able to divorce ourselves from that, because it can take away from a performance if it's noticeable that somebody is not engaging and everybody else is. The whole issue of bowing is something that I think is individual to each choir. I think it's important to acknowledge that the audience is applauding your efforts and the music, but it's not necessary every time. Certainly maybe after the first piece, and then if there's thunderous applause after a few other pieces, and of course at the end, bowing is great. Otherwise, the conductor just acknowledges the choir and takes a bow. The conductor takes the bow, him or herself. Bowing, for me, I used to just spread my arms out, and everybody, I can see everybody here, and most of you have rung with me, so you know what I do. And I just put my arms out, and that is the cue for the choir to bend at the waist, look at the table, and say, "I love handbells," and then they stand up. And the reason they say, "I love handbells" together, Lauren is laughing. The reason they say it together is so that everybody comes back up together. Otherwise, here again, if it's bobbing up and down, it takes away from the performance. And it's kind of fun. And I know that my ringers at Bucknell had all kinds of phrases that they said other than "I love handbells," but we won't go into that. But they knew the rhythm of it, so it worked really well. Sometimes conductors like to have the choir bow with them, and that's good. Whatever works, the important thing is consistency. And rehearsing everything logistically is a big, big, big item as far as I'm concerned, because it makes everything smooth, and then the audience doesn't worry that something's going to go wrong, or that why is that person talking, or did they lose a bell, or and things happen in performance. And I know Dave's been in that situation where maybe a bell didn't show up at where it was supposed to be, and so he makes a joke about it, and that's great. And so you go with the flow and engaging with the audience again, with humor, and also with heart, as you're talking about different pieces of music. It all helps. I think I learned as a conductor, and in my early years, I used to pretty much read everything that I said to the audience, and I decided that there was some kind of barrier there between me and the audience with that piece of paper. And so I opted at that point not only to memorize the program as a conductor, but to memorize what I was going to say and to plan it out and think about it. And it's interesting how if you write it out, it comes back in the memory. But here again, I'm kind of regressing back to the conductor. One question that people always have is about how to deal with if you have a flutist or a cellist or a violinist or somebody that's playing with the choir. When do they come on, especially if they're not a part of the choir? I would say if they are a part of the choir, that person needs to be able to go off stage to warm up and prepare. So your bell assigning needs to make that happen for the piece before they play. But soloists, when they come onto the stage, I always went off to get the soloist, off stage to get the soloist, or I might sometimes just say, "Please welcome so-and-so, our violinist, our violin soloist for the evening." But if I went off stage, then the soloist always comes on, the soloist always precedes the conductor, going on and off stage. If the conductor is a woman, a male soloist still leads the way when they go off stage, but if they feel comfortable doing this, can step aside at the exit to for courtesy, for the courtesy of letting the woman go first. This only applies to going off stage. Going on stage, the soloist always goes on first. Whether if it's a female conductor and a male soloist, the male goes on. And at the end of the piece with the soloist, the conductor always acknowledges the soloist first, who hopefully bows graciously, maybe even shakes the conductor's hand. And the soloist always makes the first move in that regard. It's not necessary for the conductor to take the soloist's hand. If they want to do that, that's their privilege. And then after that, after the soloist has been acknowledged, then the ringers, then you acknowledge the ringers, and then maybe bow yourself as the conductor. Under no circumstances does the soloist motion to the ringers or for the ringers to bow. And that can be really confusing. And I used to talk to my Bucknell students when we would have soloists. If they acknowledge you, like I do, to bow, don't bow. You know, that's not their prerogative. The soloist has no authority over the ringers. It's only the conductor. Stage presence also has, tell me when I'm getting close to, maybe I've already surpassed 15 minutes, but I get a couple more points in here and then we can open it up for discussion. I think stage presence certainly is definitely affected by the interest of the concert program. And that's another whole subject. We could go into that for hours. I just got an email from a colleague asking for my ideas on programming. And that's something that I'd love to do. Some conductors have a hard time doing that and making a program interesting or too long. We don't want to make our programs too long. People just don't engage over an hour. Over an hour is too long, I think, but you know, an hour and a half for most symphonic concerts is very appropriate. And I would say if it's a really fine handbell choir with lots of variety in the programming, then an hour and a half at the most. So contrast, sequence, all of that is important. And we want to make sure that we keep that vitality going through to the very end of the last note of the last composition. And sometimes that's hard, but we don't want to let down or lose vitality because we lose the audience at that point. We always want to remember that the piece isn't finished until after the applause starts. So we're really in control of that final chord. And sometimes that silence before the applause can be one of the most important parts of that composition. So silence can be very engaging if we allow it to happen. And I think we as ringers can control that just by not putting our bells down, just leaving them there until the conductor lets down. And then we do the same. We want to show through our graceful movements, the inner phrase or disruptive stop sounds sometimes, the jaggedness of music. And all of that is what's so interesting and so engaging. I think as ringers and as a conductor, I wanted my ringers to feel that the music became a part of them, that they actually were making that music happen, because that becomes a part of the listeners. And so many of you have heard me talk about connection and how important that is. And Lauren and Hillary, who are my former students, have heard me say this many times. If I'm engaging with the ringers and the ringers are engaged with the music, and I'm doing that through my gestures and they're doing it through the music and through their gestures, because they're the ones that are making the music, then for some magical reason, the audience also becomes engaged. The connection between conductor and ringer is so, so, so important. Because an audience feels that. It definitely, and I can't explain why, but it's magical. And as I said before, we don't want to ever draw attention to ourselves intentionally with our gestures and musical movements. So here again, it's important that everybody moves the same way, that there's not one ringer out there doing this kind of thing while everybody else is closer to the body, because that draws attention. The ringers can really bring forth a legato sound with their motions and crescendos and what have you. So the audience itself is the reason for your public performance. You know, you've been rehearsing all of this stuff and you do it for these people who come because they really want to hear you. And so we want to engage and make them feel like this was a real event, something that I'm really glad I came to. And we want them to, if we respond to them, to the audience, and their intensity, sometimes just in the way they applaud, then they will in turn respond to ours. We want to listen to the music. It's what's speaking. And as I said before, the music is the most important thing in a performance. And the reason for stage presence and practicing logistics is so that all of that is just second nature. Totally, nobody has to whisper, where do we go here? Where's your bell? We don't have to do that. It's all rehearsed, but it doesn't look rehearsed, you know, and that's the beauty. Nobody knows all that went on behind the scenes to make it happen. So the professional performer, whether an actor or a musician, recognizes all of that magic that happens. One feels the intensity of the ringers, one feels the intensity of the conductor, and one feels the intensity of the audience. And all of those things connect and come together. Questions?
Yeah, so thank you, DP, for all of that. And I have heard it before, and I never said I love handbells anything else, but I definitely said it in different tones. So at this point, it did well. I love handbells. It did poorly. I love handbells.
Well, it would depend on how the piece went too, or how you played.
Exactly. But so we want to give everybody else an opportunity to ask questions right now. If you don't trust your sound, or you don't have a mic or something like that, anyone can feel free to put questions in the chat, and I'll pull questions out of there. Or anyone who wants to speak up, go ahead and speak up.
So many familiar faces.
Anybody?
That's okay.
I saw some people waving. Lindo, is that? Go ahead.
Well, I don't have a question, Bill. I wanted to just say hi and to tell you that my very first big concert experience with handbells was in Paris with Fred Grayman. There was about 100 of us on one of those tours. And so what I learned to say was, j'aime le clochard. So it's still what I say.
That's great. That's so great. Wonderful. Yeah, as long as everybody says it in the same rhythm, you know, and comes up together, it works. It's fun.
Hey, Bill.
Yes.
How do you feel about motion of our bodies in terms of our placement back and forth away from the table and in rhythm with the music. I mean, do you want us to be stationary, or do you think responding with the music is appropriate?
That's a really good question, Susan. Yes, definitely responding to the music is preferred, as long as it's not overdone, you know. But I love to see choirs that are, engaged by moving with the music and
Okay.
allowing that to happen and coming back and forth. You can rock on one foot
Right.
forward and back, because sometimes to get a crescendo, you might want to come back a little bit, or for something soft, you're forward. And that really is not distracting from the music. That's playing right into the music. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. At the end of a piece, I always ask my ringers to, once I brought the bells down to the table, then I would ask them to all just simultaneously step back with their hands behind their backs, and acknowledge the applause. There's another time where the ringers can look at the audience and smile and really engage. That whole hands behind the back thing started when I started conducting festivals, and I would notice that a lot of choirs would just dive right into the next, they would never acknowledge the audience. They just dive into the next to get their next piece ready and move their bells. And I think it's just so much nicer to acknowledge the audience. But yes, movement's great, Susan. Yeah.
Okay.
Within reason, of course.
Bill, I have a question.
Yes,
How do
Juanita.
you feel? Yes. How do you feel about doing an intermission for a concert that's about an hour and 15 minutes versus just playing straight through?
Wow, I think it depends on the situation, Juanita. A lot of times there are costume changes that happen during an intermission, so then that's necessary. And just for the sake of the strength of the ringers, if it's a really intense program and there's a lot of difficult stuff, sometimes they just need a moment to clear their minds. And I always did intermissions when I would go on tour with the Bucknell Ringers. And I think they appreciated that. It gave them time to just let down, get a drink of water, and get themselves back. And I'd always told the audience we'd be back in 7 minutes. And that's basically what we did. So yeah, we made it short. But without intermission is fine too, as long as the program moves and keeps moving. I think I always did my more serious literature in the beginning, and then intermission, then we did some of the pop stuff and other things. And so that kind of broke that up too.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
We have a question from chat, which is, what are your thoughts on interactions between the ringers, either during numbers or between the songs? And that's from Karen W. Thank you very much.
Sure. Well, I think if it's a humorous piece where there is where it calls for engagement among the ringers, like the Flight of the Bumblebee or something like that, then yeah, have fun with it and do that. I mean, the audience gets into that big time. And I think that's important. Obviously, there should not be talking going on, but I guess sometimes when it's one of those humorous pieces, there might be fake talking or whatever. So yes, that's appropriate. But for the most part, I like to keep it a little more formal when it's the more serious music. Yeah. All good questions.
Well, on that note too, some people feel that occasionally it's good to show an engagement between ringers that are next to each other a bit as the music is, trading off musically, that you look to each other a little bit. Okay. Is that appropriate, do you think?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Anything that helps the music. Yeah,
Just
that's
not showy, you're saying.
right. Yeah. I mean, if you're handing off a bell to somebody, obviously you've got to look at them to make sure you're going to both
But you
connect.
could be playing like a phrase that's back and forth between them or something like that.
Sure. And that can be fun. Just a little interaction there is great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's up to the director.
Obviously. Yeah. No, I think any interaction that happens, usually if there's a purpose for it, then it's fine. It's when it gets out of hand and people are doing things that don't apply to the music, then that's when it gets to be troublesome. I see my dear friend Bill Mathis there. So good to see you, Bill. How are things going in retirement? You're on mute.
There we go. Good. Bells of the Lakes actually is recording this weekend. First
Fabulous.
time they've been together in a year.
I know. It's amazing, isn't it? What we've all been through. Whoa. Incredible. I'm looking at all the faces that I know here. Almost all of you.
Does anyone else have questions or thoughts or anything like that? I know this is one of those things that I feel like I didn't realize how much I learned until I, move on to another choir and then they do things differently. And you're like, oh, well, I've actually been trained in the way that so-and-so does things, or especially with Dr. Payne, because he was really the first one that did that for me. We have another question though in chat, which is, what are your thoughts on creating a concert narrative that goes beyond space for ringers to move equipment and engages the audience? I'm not entirely certain I understand, I don't know, do you feel like you understood that?
Not totally, no.
Creating a concert narrative that goes beyond space for ringers to move equipment and engages the audience. Do you mean like going out and ringing among, like in the crowd, Nisa? Or Nisa, I'm sorry, how do you say that? Sorry, so she doesn't have a microphone. Oh, the way directors have to talk between each song to give the choir space. So, okay. So is there like a narrative beyond that? Or what are you talking about? Are you talking about like, should you talk more about the song? Should you talk less? Should you time it? Is that sort of the question you're asking?
Yeah, that's the question she's asking, I think. Yeah. And yeah, for me, brevity is always the best. I like the fact that with the Raleigh Ringers, when I've conducted Virtuoso, they have a light that blinks at the front of the stage to tell me to shut up. And, that's great because then as conductors, we have a narrative there in our head, so we can go on forever if we have to, but we just need to be able to cut it off. And so some signal from the ringers is always nice, but that light on the front of the stage is so perfect. I don't always pay attention to it, but it's there. And
neither does Dave.
Yeah, keeps it short. Yeah, you don't want to tell the whole history of handbells. They're just not gonna listen to that for very long. So yeah, I usually talk about the music. And then if we're on tour, where we've been, where the people, when I traveled with a college group, they were always interested in what the ringers majors were and what year they were in and, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, short and to the point is the best.
Well, and so the follow-up is, would you consider just letting the audience watch the setup change without saying anything? Like not distracting them?
I know that's where some other people jump in on that, because that's a very good question. There's that period of silence, and I think, I love silence in music, but I don't know whether I like that uncomfortable feeling of watching people change bells. And so I don't know. Some of you other conductors, what do you think, or ringers, what do you feel about that? Have you done that? Where I think I remember Dave Davidson not talking a lot.
Right.
And it never bothered me. I knew that was Dave's style. And so I recall that now. Yeah. Anybody else have thoughts on that? Brian, what about you? Put you on the spot. Mute.
Yeah, something is muted, Brian. Your mouth is moving and nothing's happening.
Turn the gain up on the mic.
There we go.
Yeah, we did without talking, but I've always had some sort of like interstitial music that at least filled that space, so it wasn't just awkward silence, because it's awkward for the audience, but it's also awkward for the ringers who feel like they have to rush because everyone's waiting on them.
Good point.
Yeah, I think most of the time you have everything where you know where it is and you can do it quickly, but like if something goes wrong in that, now you're running around and everyone's going and the audience is like,
right.
Someone in chat says you might lose the audience to their cell phones if the silence is too long, which is probably true. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so it's a new era as far as that goes. I also used to ask the audience questions, and without fail, people ask questions. I mean, you remember that, Lauren. And they were good questions. Why don't you wear gloves? Why, And I told the ringers, don't ever show that you've heard this question 8 million times. You have to act like it's the very first time you've heard that question. And they were so good about that, because we'd get the same questions.
And they need to laugh at our jokes, even if they're not really funny.
Absolutely.
There are some question answers that the Raleigh Ringers could probably give you word for word, Dave. That we know what you're going to say.
I think the other thing that Bill taught me was, to practice that the stream of your concert from piece to piece, because I've been to concerts where it's obvious that people aren't finding a bell because they've never maybe done them in that sequence, but practicing the music in that sequence so you know what's predictable and you can go and acquire what you need to acquire. Boom, boom, boom. We do a thing we started several years ago in the bass, which typically is the most changes that have to happen, where we have a chart where the bass bells sit, what that needs to look like after we have put the right bells on the table for that song. So we need to make sure that setup looks like what we've got on that card, and we can get there and not be puzzled and waiting and looking and finding or whatever. But we are very emphatic about the movements that we have to make between songs. So practice that sequence of songs, is important.
Right. Good point.
So sort of as a partial new question, partial follow-up to that, someone asked in the chat, Ellie Hodder, do you think the new comfort with technology is going to become a bigger part of the performance, or could you see using it more? Because there's basically, what she says is there's a huge difference between those of us who have a performance space and church, school, or gym options, but now there's more like screens and projection and other things like that. Do you have any thoughts on using that to complement a show instead of overtake it, or take the place maybe of that talking head to distract the audience from the ringers not finding their bell?
Technology, because of COVID, I came out of my box big time, learning all kinds of stuff that I never thought I would learn. And it taught me that we can be in any kind of situation and we can make it happen. We can make music happen. Music isn't going to die because, you know, there's a pandemic going on, and it's important to people to have music in their lives. So yeah, I think the more multimedia that we can use in our performances, the better. And if I were still teaching, and at this point, I probably would begin to get technicians to help us screen some of our music, to visually have something going on. I'm writing a multi-movement choral work for choir and string orchestra, and it's going to be like a 60-minute work, and we're going to do multimedia, and the reason for that is because of what's gone on these last 12 months. I find how important it is for people to visualize what's being sung or played or said. And it's just another reinforcement. And we've got the technology to do it now. So that's what's fabulous about it.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to have to find the balance between that being an augment and it being distracting. Because I've been to several shows that had multimedia. I used to go to the Philadelphia Orchestra, those summer concerts that are outside, and they would do a lot of stuff with screens in the summer. And some of them were great, and some of them were very distracting.
Right.
And some of them it was supposed to be, like the time they played along the Looney Tunes, it was kind of supposed to be distracting. But you know, I think we're gonna make mistakes on both sides as we try to incorporate more of those things.
No, yeah, and I've seen that with some of your groups here, and you know, just at the end of a program to use have a large screen and have something that, you know, if it's a patriotic tune, you know, visualize it that way. Whatever, you know, there's just so many ways, wonderful ways to engage people.
Bill, I know you have thoughts on encores and, you know, like leaving the stage and coming back. If you've got the spot where you can, you know, leave the stage and go backstage and come back on and so forth. Some of the logistics around what happens towards the end of the show. Could you share some of your thoughts there?
Sure. I think most of you end your programs with something really big and pizzazzy, if that's a word, and the audience obviously it goes nuts. And I would always acknowledge the ringers after that last piece, have them bow, and I would bow, and then I would just cue my ringers to leave the stage, knowing that applause was going to continue. And then as soon as the last ringer got in, they were already turning around in the hall to come back in order. And so it was, there's no space, actually. There's no time when there's not somebody on stage. It's just out and in. And then if the audience continues to applaud, then we can do an encore. And a lot of times we did. And when I think back to my Bucknell days, we of course always ended with the McChesney festive dance, and we didn't go out after that because it was just we just knew that they were going to want to hear it again, so we just did it again and then went out and came back in. So there's various scenarios. Does that answer your question, Dave?
Absolutely. The other one, you may have touched on it and I missed it. You know, when you have a soloist, is it appropriate for the ringers to applaud for that soloist when they're acknowledged?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. Yeah, it is. I'm thinking if you think about a piano concerto, or a violin concerto with orchestra, you'll see the string players tapping their bows on the stands, and which is a form of, it's just showing that they really loved working with that person. Yeah, so I think it's fine. Yeah.
Cool.
I hope that was the right answer.
Absolutely.
Bill, I have a question. Maybe
Yeah.
this.
Hi.
So if you have additional instruments in pieces that you're playing, you have a percussion, you have a flutist, you might have a cellist, are they all considered soloists? Or, you know, if
Yeah.
they play with several pieces and sometimes they're fluff and sometimes they're a main part of it. So every time they come on, they should be acknowledged when they're a part of a piece.
I would. Yeah. I think so. I think it's, you can say we welcome back so-and-so, and there doesn't have to be a big hoopla over that. They can just walk on. You don't have to go back and get them, you know, that kind of thing.
Well, we're usually performing in church sanctuaries. There's no place for us to go off and come back on. They're usually sitting in the front pew or off to the side. So,
Right. Right. So I think if it's more than, if they're doing more than one or two pieces, then you can just say, we welcome back so-and-so, and then you acknowledge them at the end like you did all the other pieces, but maybe not as much as you did at the beginning. Yeah. But if it's a trio or whatever, there's a great arrangement of Dona Nobis Pacem. Is that McChesney as well? And it requires violin and viola and cello, I think. And so that's a string trio. And so you bring them on as soloists, and they're all acknowledged as soloists. Yeah.
Well, we are getting towards the end of our hour. Are there any more questions before we start to wrap things up?
Is Hillary, are you there still?
I'm
Hillary,
here. Yeah, I'm here.
I lost you. Yeah.
I'm on another screen. You can't see me, but I'm here.
Okay. Okay. Hillary is also a former student and working now with HMA.
Yeah.
With national seminar and stuff, and really appreciate it. But I just wanted to let you all know, there's a little plug for Hillary, that she has a new book coming out that she's published called Playing My Heart Out. And it's called One Ringer's Passion for Handbells. And it's going to be available on Amazon.
It's
right?
available. Yep. It's available now as a Kindle ebook. And within the next couple of weeks, it's going to be available in print. And Dr. Payne did the foreword to the book. And I also interviewed Dave, and Dave gave me some feedback, and he's quoted in the book as well. It's kind of an inside look at what we do as ringers. Lots of little secrets about the Rook Chapel Ringers if you want to get the inside scoop. But things that, you know, any handbell ringer or director could relate to. And then also on a more global scale, it's about this passion that we do, you know, and for us it's handbells, but for someone else it might be, you know, hiking, it might be knitting, it might anything, but this thing, whatever this thing is that lights us up, and for us it happens to be handbells. So I'm pretty excited about it. Thank you, DP.
You're welcome. Had to get that in there.
What's the title again?
It's called Playing My Heart Out. And then the subtitle is One Ringer's Passion for Handbells.
It's a great book. Great book.
So I had. We did have one final question that was sent to me, which was, what are your feelings on printed programs versus not having one?
Whoa. I think if you're on tour, it's important to have a printed program. Yeah, for a professional concert, yes. If it's an afternoon event that maybe only be 30 minutes long, then no, a program isn't necessary. But I think programs are professional and give a lot of information. So I would say yes more than not.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Payne, for sharing all your expertise. And it's wonderful to see you, wonderful to see everyone and hear from you. And thank you,
Yeah.
everybody, for coming.
Let me just
Go
say
ahead,
a couple.
Dan.
Let me just say a couple of things since we're doing advertising. Don't forget about Virtuoso. Bill already mentioned that we had to postpone, of course, and as things get better, our intention is that we will hold the next Virtuoso next June 22. We'll see how things are going, but you know, we have had submissions for auditions when we thought it was going to happen this year, and we're going to keep that information around and add to those submissions probably this fall, and then get back into the mode of doing another Virtuoso. So if you're not familiar with Virtuoso, we've done 4 of those, all very focused on performance for handbells. So intense rehearsals for several days, lots of wonderful social time, and then culminating in a final performance in a concert hall. So Bill has been our leader every year and has done, as you would expect, an amazing job. So be looking out for those announcements as things get more stable and we're able to confirm some things, but our intention is next summer. There's also this week a couple Guild happy hour sessions, which are community choir based roundtables. One tomorrow at 4, I believe, and then one Thursday at 7, sponsored by the Guild. Again, a roundtable in and about all about community groups. So those who are involved in community groups might want to check that out as well. And Sarah, are you going to tell us about our next one of these roundtables, or is Lauren going to do that?
I was going to do that, but so
Okay,
I suppose Sarah can jump in if she has any more. Essentially, so our next roundtable is April 19th, so 2 weeks from now, same time, and it's a tips and tricks sharing session. So I think, Sarah, we have some stuff prepared. I know we got an email asking about our tips and tricks, and then you know, we'll also be asking you what you do that helps you handle some tricky parts of music. So thank you all again for coming, and hopefully we'll see you then. Yeah.
Thank you,
Bill. Thank you, Bill, so much.
Somehow
Thank
I
you.
got off the screen. Good to see you all.